Okay.
You'll get a little pop-up. And
Oh,
then
Doug, should I start the recording?
I'm recording on this side, but you can also record also.
That's okay. Oh, wait, but what will happen when you leave?
I'm going to pass the host over to you. It'll say you are now the host, and that'll give you the power when you end the meeting. That will end the live stream and end the recordings and everything. So
Okay,
that's all.
cool.
Power. Oh, I can't do that. Power.
Pow.
Here. Power.
It's dizzying, really. And I will add a few seconds. I will open up the, I'm going to do it now, actually. I'm going to open up the waiting room so everyone can come in, and then I'll pass it over to you, Maya, okay?
Okay, sounds great.
And I'll pass it over to you.
Great. Wonderful. Hi, everybody. The pause of professional welcoming has ensued. Right before we opened up the waiting room, there was lots of nice banter with the panelists. So I'm excited to welcome you into that energy. We are right on 4:30, and if it's anything that I've learned from the flow of Zoom time in the past 2.5 years, it's that the gathering moment, it gets like a little bit later and later. So I'm going to start with the introductions and welcoming, knowing that folks will be trickling into the Zoom room. A few very preliminary notes for those of you who are already here. This is formatted as an open Zoom meeting. So we can see your thumbnails, and it's also being recorded. So if you wish to stay off of the recording, please feel free to keep your videos off and sound off during the discussion. But after the discussion, we will have some time for convivial chats, Q&A. And at that point, you're very welcome to pose your question with video and voice to any of our panelists, or you can still keep your video off and defer to the space of the chat, and we can bring your questions into that space. But I do want to let you know that it is being recorded, which is a generosity of our guests, especially because it is a busy time of year for those who are affiliated with teaching and learning, or with gallery cycles and grants, and, you know, frankly, life in general. So it'll be nice to have that documents to return to. At this point, I suppose I should say hello and let you know who I am. My name is Maya Oppenheimer. I am the coordinator of Conversations in Contemporary Art this year. It's my 3rd year at that rodeo. I'll say a little bit more about that rodeo in due course, but before I introduce CICA, I would love to say a few words of thanks to Fourth Space. Fourth Space, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a facilitating platform based at Concordia University. It's on the corner of Mackay and de Maisonneuve in the LB building, right near the library. I'm going to share with you the link in the chat so you can look up their activities. They have been very invaluable during the COVID closure on campus in helping navigate the digital hospitality of Conversations in Contemporary Art. So for a gathering that talks about admin and hosting, Fourth Space has been very much part of that, and CICA, and they facilitate engagement with research at Concordia, both online and now increasingly on campus. So you can find more about their activities via the link I just put in the chat. And I would like to specifically shout out to Anna, the manager at Fourth Space, Doug, who is still on the call, tech support, and Carrie Valmsted, who has been helping with the publicity of these events. This is the last conversation in contemporary art of this series, not of ever. So I did want to make sure that I gave that shout out of thanks specifically to Anna and Doug and Carrie. So now that Fourth Space is introduced, I can say a little bit about CICA. CICA, as it is affectionately known, is Conversations in Contemporary Art, and I recognize a few names in the Zoom thumbnails of folks who've been to past iterations of this platform. It is hosted and run out of the Department of Studio Arts, specifically the MFA program. And it has run since around 2012, 2013. So we're getting up to our 10-year anniversary. And it is a free platform that welcomes, sometimes by Zoom, sometimes in person, sometimes we do field trips, to artists, curators, writers, educators, filmmakers, designers, to share their practices, not only with Concordia student and faculty, but also to interested artists, practitioners in Montreal. But especially since we've been operating on Zoom for the past couple of years, we've been able to welcome in national and international audiences into our events. So that's been a really wonderful possibility to extend our audiences. The conversation that we're hosting today on administration and hosting is one that we've been working on for a while. So to allude to a thematic of this discussion, the guests have mentioned that part of the goal of this conversation is to make transparent the things that are often behind the scenes in cultural work. And I wanted to make a special shout out to Nicole's patience and persistence with myself to make this talk happen. It was originally planned to take place in January. And if we can remember anything specific about January, even though it seems like ages ago, we were, of course, trying to navigate the Omicron wave, and campus was under a very particular an abundance of caution, I suppose is the term that we're using. And a lot of things that were in the programming for FOFA Gallery, of which Nicole is affiliated, were piling up. So we had to rebook this talk, and we're now gathering on the 31st of March. And also we had to pivot again from what we hoped would be a hybrid engagement with you all. Some of you perhaps being able to join us on campus downtown in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal, Mouniang. We are now doing this entirely online. So that is a little bit of the allusion to the roller coaster of this talk. But I want to also mention a little bit about how and where we would normally be gathering with conversations in contemporary art. It is often on the downtown campus of Concordia. I forgot Concordia for a minute there. And that's also where the FOFA Gallery is located, twin buildings in downtown Tiohtià:ke. And when I was thinking about appropriate ways to welcome us into this space and this gathering, talking about administration and hosting, I was reminded by an event that I was able to go to via Zoom in Toronto last night. It was an event hosted in conjunction with Nations by Artists at the Arts Museum of the University of Toronto. An event hosted in conjunction with the show Nations by Artists, curated by Mick Migwins and Sarah O'Byer-Sheridan. And one of the guests for that talk was Decolonize This Space. And they were holding a banner in some of their publicity, but also in some of the work on the show that emphasizes under the museum, under the university, under the institution, the land. And when we sometimes gather in spaces like this digitally through Zoom, it's important, I think, to reiterate that under these institutions, FOFA Gallery, CICA, which is linked to Concordia, Fourth Space, which is also linked to Concordia, and our own connectivity through Zoom, which are through cables, is the land. And we are welcoming in guests who are across Tiohtià:ke, Mouniang, Montreal, which is unceded Kanien'kehá:ka land, and also Ottawa. Shelley, Nicole, and Geneviève, who I'll introduce in a second, are joining me from Tiohtià:ke. But Fran is in Ottawa, which is also unceded land of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. So feel free to consider how you are coming into this space and your affiliations on land as we think about themes of administration and hosting and how intertwined those energies are in terms of labor and care and maintenance and awareness. So to the speakers. It is really my pleasure to be welcoming this this active group of conversationalists and professionals, and is that word multi-hyphenates of cultural workers to this last CICA conversation. And it was a nice, careful process working with Nicole to figure out how we could invite people into this dialogue. And Nicole, I've had the pleasure of getting to know you a bit better once you came onto faculty at Concordia University as the director of FOFA Gallery. You came on during COVID, so a pretty particular time to start. But I also had the opportunity to know your work before I met you in person, which is not uncommon in cultural work. Through your writing and your curating, but also your critical contributions to fields of craft, as well as your editing work on desire change. I think that was the first project of yours that I encountered. And I've enjoyed learning from you in terms of how you bring an awareness and an advocacy and a mentoring energy to your work. I'd like to next introduce Geneviève Wallen, who is a colleague with Nicole, but also with myself at FOFA Gallery. I've also enjoyed getting to know you a little bit better, Geneviève, as I walk by the glass wall facade of FOFA Gallery and distract you from all of the busy things you have to do of a day. I learn a lot from you also in terms of how you unpack, complex but nuanced and very important themes in cultural spaces across writing, across mentoring and discussions with students, like we were talking about earlier before the waiting room opened, but also through your curatorial work with themes of commensality, of care, of unfinished ideas, of gifting, social connections, and how we can make those present and perhaps omnipresent through cultural work. There's a kindred connection with Franchesca, who I have not yet met in person, but hope to soon, in terms of thinking about relationships of guesting and hosting, of gift giving, of kinship, of thinking about lateral connections in cultural work and not hierarchical labor. And you are also a multi-hyphenate working across teaching and curating. You have a background in studio practice, I learned from your bio, and you are also continuing into scholarship. We're now working towards your PhD to add to your curatorial hat. And I look forward to engaging further with your writing work in that capacity too. And someone who's also engaged in teaching and learning, Shelley, who is a MFA student, candidate at the studio arts department here in fibers and material practice. I've had the pleasure of getting to know you in your capacity as a pedagogue through teaching and learning practices. And every time I hear you talk about your work and experience, you mention something about a job I didn't know you had, be it advocacy work at the Banff Center, arts administration, working on artist run center committees. Again, a lot of this admin work that is part and parcel to working in cultural industries, but isn't often discussed and articulated and thought through. So that's enough talking from me. I'm going to hand the mic over to Nicole, Geneviève, Fran, and Shelley. I'm going to put links in the chat to the full professional bios of each of our guests. And thank you everybody for coming. We can keep the chat active. And at around 5:30 or so, we'll segue into discussion and questions. Thank you very much.
Great. Is that, I guess I'll jump in and take it from there. Thank you so much, Maya. That was such a nice introduction. And yeah, I wanted to start by also thanking Maya for the invitation to do the talk and just your help and flexibility and guidance, sort of shepherding us through this process of getting everything ready and up and running. And again, thanks to Anna and the team at Fourth Space for helping with all the promotional aspects, and Doug, who's here helping us with the tech setup too. I am so excited to be here in dialogue with these three amazing women who I all consider to be colleagues and mentors and friends. I think you all are all of those things to me. And to have this chat, I think we had a little pre-chat a couple weeks ago and a little pre-hangout before this started. And I just get the sense we have like so much to say to each other. So it's going to be, we've sort of done this as a kind of rambling, unstructured chat with some questions to guide us along the way. But yeah, I feel like there's lots for us to kind of chat about. Just to briefly kind of situate us and build off of Maya's introduction, I wanted to kind of just personally mention how I know everyone too, and sort of part of my reasoning for inviting each of you. So Shelley Ouellet, I actually know from Calgary way back in the day, partly from ACAD, now AU Arts, where I did my undergrad, but also very much from the Calgary artist-run community. A kind of network of folks that all knew each other there, and where at the time Shelley was running this amazing little gallery out of her basement called, or out of her house called Carpet and Toast. Just to add to the list of other things you may not know about what Shelley and what she's done, and who I've had some great chats with lately, sort of reminding me of some of the tricks and tools that are so essential to that kind of artist-run way of working. Next, Franchesca, who I've had the pleasure of working with at the National Gallery of Canada, where she was the curatorial assistant for the Indigenous Art Department while I was working in the Contemporary Art Department, and who's someone who has just been, I think, as long as I've known you, consistently expanding my view of what it means to practice care in the arts and sort of how that works, and also just continues to raise my expectations of what institutions can and should do, and how institutions could be working differently. I think that's something that I really value about your way of thinking. And finally, Geneviève Wallen, who I've come to know as my dear colleague at the FOFA Gallery since starting there in July. And who have had just like the immense pleasure of seeing in action on a kind of day-to-day basis, both at the gallery and sort of as I get to learn about your independent curatorial practice as well, and just been totally blown away by how you find these amazing ways to kind of include folks, artists and the public, and sort of create environments of like welcome and sharing. And also like helping me to kind of co-create a work environment that I like to think is like fun. Like I like to think that might be part of how we work together. So, and in general, I wanted to bring us all together as you're all three people that I've been having these just fantastic conversations with over the last year or so. And in particular, as I sort of land in this new role at the FOFA Gallery, coming from the NGC, this move to this sort of smaller, more nimble and less institutional space has been this real opportunity to think about how I want to be in a space and how I want to be in my work, and also in a community. Maya has also mentioned too this kind of informal theme for CICA this year that was kind of more around like nuts and bolts. So I was interested in having a chat about curatorial practice that was more about that kind of aspect rather than like a kind of conventional curator's talk where I talk about what I've done. I'm kind of more interested in imagining where I might go with a nice set of people. That's sort of the impetus here too. And if you'll allow me, I have another brief anecdote by way of kind of setting us up. In the first couple of weeks on the job, Jen and Audrey, who was our communications and curatorial assistants at the gallery, we went into the gallery as we were allowed back into the space, and we started this work of cleaning and prepping the space and getting it ready. And we cleaned and we hauled and we patched and we painted, and I felt such relief. And I might even say like joy as I was like down on my hands and knees scrubbing paint off the floor, and sort of that action of giving this space some love is sort of how we were thinking about it as we got ready to welcome people back after what had been a quite long closure. And it struck me that I was like as I was doing that work, how much I had been sort of removed or alienated from that kind of like day-to-day functioning of gallery labor. And, you know, in part because the NGC is a larger kind of more institutional space of working, and in part because of the pandemic. But I think as I was doing that cleaning, I kept thinking about how this sort of maintenance work broadly, and I'm thinking very much to it sort of in that tradition of feminist thinking around maintenance work and labor, how that work on a kind of like really material or physical level could it be extended to think in a more general sense about care for an organization and its administrative processes, its people, its staff, its community. But from starting from this really kind of like physical and infrastructural place. And sort of secondly, I wanted to have this conversation with you all because I think like by nature, I'm not especially inclined to hospitality. I come from this long line of women on my mother's side who like don't particularly enjoy entertaining in a formal sense. And I think in a lot of my projects, I tend to think first about the details and the practical parts before I think about the care and the fun. So also part of my impulse of having this set of people here, as you're all folks that I've learned a lot from in terms of hospitality and care and kind of different ways of working together. So there you go. That's my little preamble before we get started. And then to sort of jump into things, we'd each been asked by Maya to, as we were trying to gather images for this, to share an image that Maya's prompt was sort of a moment of note, a good memory, an example of the sort of work you would like to bring into the world. So we'll start by kind of going around and I'll share those images up on the screen with everyone for a minute and perhaps invite you each to take a second to talk about that, or more than a second, to talk about that image. And the kind of co-prompt to go with that was, to think about, to sort of discuss your relationship maybe to curating curatorial practice, or if that word doesn't fit comfortably, like facilitation or hosting in whatever way feels good. So I am going to share my little screen here. Give me a second. And get this up and running. Fran, would you like to start us off?
Hi, thank you so much for all of those wonderful introductions. So this is an image of a project called Swarm. It's up on Gallery 1003 in Winnipeg right now. It's a web exhibition, but it started off as an exploration as part of an artist collective. And there are more details on the website. Please check out the amazing work that my collaborators, co-creators, writers, all made. They're amazing humans and made beautiful, beautiful responses. But this was one of my contributions to the project, which was having a beading table where we sorted beads. And I don't always feel particularly comfortable teaching beading workshops or teaching people how to bead when there isn't a relationship built, and folks can take that beading and then make commercial practices out of it, especially like non-Indigenous folks. And so sorting beads has become like a way to activate spaces and activate this like awareness around or like this mental space where we can just talk about what we're thinking about. And I think at this particular table, we are talking about breathing and inhale and exhale. And I really just got to know the folks in attendance. I actually didn't email them beforehand, so I don't feel comfortable saying their names, but yeah, it just this idea of being present and the action of making and as a way to be present. And that stems from my mentor, Kathy Mattis, who does Métis kitchen table talks. And so there's this also generational exchange happening between Indigenous academics and creating non-hierarchical spaces. So, yeah. And then this is the second image I suggest or put in. And this is more of a example of like how facilitation or administration, I call myself a cultural producer based on the fact that I started as a maker. I do writing. I like to work collaboratively with artists that I'm curating or that I'm working with on projects. And so this is the Beading Symposium, Segmentation, Winnipeg 2020. It was a really, really large event that was concurrent to the first exhibition I had been contracted to do as an independent curator out of my master's. I made decisions. Whether or not they were wise decisions or not was a whole other thing. I had no idea what I was getting into. But the idea of like making spaces with beading tables and making sure that the live stream of the talks that were happening in the theater downstairs were also being available to folks who wanted to visit and chat upstairs. There was food everywhere. I'm really, really proud of this event. And really, it was a project that I couldn't have done if I wasn't held by the folks around me. And so Swarm was also in attendance there at the middle table there. You can also see artists like Catherine Boyer and Jack in the foreground from Winnipeg. I'm forgetting Jack's last name. We're on a first name basis, but it just felt really lovely to be held by community and to also do something that celebrates the unique beading culture that is in Manitoba. And so I think care or hospitality, even though I was technically the host organizing the symposium, I think I was often the guest. And I was in the, I was not at the mercy, but I benefited greatly from, see, it's really hard to articulate. I'm sorry about that. I wouldn't have been able to do it without the community that I have or that I'm a part of. And I also, in some ways that made me a guest, being able to let go and say, hey, I don't know anything about running a beading table. Can you please help me? So I think letting go of the ego that's usually associated with curation or these like roles of expertise or authority within institutions is what creates spaces like this. It wasn't me. But yeah, thank you. You can, next person.
Thanks, Fran. Geneviève, we'll let you hop in next, if that's okay.
For some reason, I was not expecting I was the next person.
Surprise!
Hi, everyone. Thank you for making time to be here and to tune in with us today on this rainy day. It's really appreciated. Yeah, when we met prior to this talk, we talked about like what it means to select pictures like for slideshows and how sometimes like it's just difficult to select something that is like representative of your practice or like how do you select, let's say, like exhibition documentation that reflects your practice. Like it's something a bit, I don't know, sometimes I feel uneasy. I just don't know what to do. And so I like Maya's prompts about good memories or what are the values that we hope to put out there. And I have to say that although like I'm a person that, you know, is talking a lot about care and that is like an intrinsic part of my practice, is I think it's important to note that my definition of care changes over time. It's not static. I do think that there were moments that I was not as caring as I wanted to be, or and I think I think it's important to know these things, that like it changes over time, that you get better in conversations with people, and that it's something that is like always evolving. All this to say, I chose this image because it's something that is very dear to my heart, that I have put in my bio, which is the project I co-run with a close friend of mine. We met during our master's, Marsha Maharani, and it's called Souped Up. And it really started with Marsha being a really good host and sometimes kind of putting, organizing dinners so that people from different like circles can meet and exchange. And I was like, oh, it could be so fun if we would like start a cooking show and then invite people and talk about the arts and talk about curating while cooking something. It didn't become a cooking show, but we did have a few dinners. And also something that I like about this is that it's very open-ended. We're not trying to put a timeline around like being productive around it. It really happens when we can and when we see that we can be together. And yeah, it's for us, it was about creating a space with other racialized curators, and having thematic dinners. So then what we would do, we would select a topic and try to have like a menu that like resonates with this topic. So like, for example, we wanted to talk about like resource sharing, and at one point, and for that, we decided to create like to have a potluck. So everybody had to bring something from their fridge, and that like this would be part of a bigger recipe. And yeah, so I think for us, it was about really thinking through like, how can we create that space that we can care for one another, get out of isolation, because sometimes curating can be a little bit like, like working in silos, and curating is very relational. And so it's about creating like also support networks between each other. And that's why also, like we said, slow building of support networks is like to acknowledge that it takes time, and that it makes sense that it takes time, because we want them to be sustainable, and to show up in the capacity that we can. And so I think it's just to inject a little bit of like tenderness and like the practice of like showing up between curators. And yeah, so we talk about like, so in that chapter that we wrote together, we talk about how it started, what was the menu of the first one, the type of conversations, who were the guests. It was very important for us to highlight like the guests and who they were, and because our work is not done alone, it's in conversation, and it's also like following a genealogy of other people who are using food as a gathering tool and as caring for community, and therefore it's not to work into like the mechanism of like innovation, but to really acknowledge that we are many doing this. But also we realize, like especially in Toronto, that people don't really gather for dinner if like there's not really like a reason for it. Like it's very like, in some ways, like everybody's super busy. It's like a very like hustly like city. And so just to also have the space, and it's like, no, we can sit together and talk. It can make sense in our schedule. I think it was also like a gift for ourselves to do this. And yeah, okay. I think I've rambled enough. Thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you. Next, we've got Shelley.
Thanks. Thanks, Nicole, for including me with this amazing group of women. I really started out right out of grad school working at an artist-run center in Calgary that was low on funds and high on hospitality. So we didn't pay very well, anybody, including me, but we sure worked hard to have a lot of fun. And that really influenced my practice. So throughout the 90s, I worked, it's wonderful to see France, tables of people working. That's a lot of the ways that I developed my early works, was working with community in various capacities, and then trying to figure out ways that, rather than asking community members to support me through labor in my practice, I was trying to figure out ways that I could give to the community to create gathering spaces like Geneviève's talking about, opportunities for artists and curators and audience members to come together in a more social environment, to talk, to just recognize our incredible work in a more casual way. The image that we're looking at is a piece that I actually was able to do twice. This image is really centered around the community at the Alberta College of Art and Design, where I was on faculty, and there was a faculty show with bloop, one image from various people. And I really wanted to acknowledge the contributions of those who identify as women in the college. The majority of our students were women identified, majority of support staff. And so I invited 100 women to come to the opening, and I gave them each a fan, and I wanted them to move the air around them, to speak about the contributions of women to our art community, especially those contributions that don't get recognized. Often nobody knows about an administrator until something goes wrong. Administrators, really good administrators, silently make things happen and keep things running smoothly, and we don't notice. So this collection of women included poets and dancers and filmmakers and curators and librarians and educators, and was really inspired by a group of students that started the Feminist Book Club. And I really wanted to create an opportunity where the fan was a gesture to talk about this labor, but also as a signal to each other, so that there could be cross connections and intergenerational connections and a real celebration. So this photo is when we're all trying to get organized for our team photo on the stairs, which would be what I exhibited. The Carpet and Toast Gallery was very much the same thing. It was in my home. So the criteria was that I liked the work that I was showing in my home, and I liked the people that I was showing. And that included dancers sometimes, that included musicians and visual artists. And if people were from out of town, they stayed in my home. And the gallery was a gesture for the art community. So not necessarily a broader public, but for artists from the community to come and mix and mingle for this quick 2-day show. And it was a very, very social space. And I feel so privileged to be part of this group. When we spoke in our pre-meeting, I said that I'm reluctant to call myself a curator. I call myself a facilitator. And I believe it was Geneviève that just said that you have a very narrow definition of what a curator is. And in my mind, I was trying to have reverence for people that dedicate their life's work to being curators, because I think it's a very difficult job. And I'm an artist practitioner, and sometimes I volunteer with galleries, but I'm never committed as a curator. And this opportunity to talk has really made me think and rethink about what it means to be a curator and an active person in the art world. So I really appreciated our pre-talk, and I really appreciate being part of this group.
Awesome. Thanks, Shelley.
Thanks.
And finally, I have my two silly little office pictures that I sent in for in response to the prompt too. And these are just two. It was sort of very much in the gesture of a kind of behind the scenes nuts and bolts moment. The spaces where I've been spending most of my time doing most of my administrative work in the last 2 years is a very domestic space, and one where I've also due to some like back injuries and like the experience of living in a aging physical body, had to construct these sort of standing desk operations so that I could work longer hours and work more comfortably. So these were sort of images and sort of in a something about this also kind of spoke to me to the more like ad hoc provisional way of getting things done. That is again back to these kind of artist run roots that I'm thinking more and more about, and ways of kind of taking care of sort of space, but also of my own body as it's kind of doing that administrative labor, which I think tends to be very, spending a lot of time in my head while also trying to remember that I have a body and that body is in relation to other places, and also thinking about, the ways that work has kind of invaded our home spaces in the last while, and yeah, like kind of increasing permeability of work and home is something that these were speaking to me about. Yeah, and again, that's maybe I'll stop there. I'm gonna stop sharing here for a minute, come back to everyone. And okay, are we going? Is everyone in a view that makes sense here for the continued talking? Maya's kind of rolling with that. Okay, awesome. I'm going to just put this away and pull up something else here. So it was so nice to hear about these kind of different, to dig in a little more to some of the projects that you've each done, because I think we sort of skimmed in and around and through some of those things when we met before. And I have, from that conversation we had before, I have some kind of broad themes and some questions I'm going to throw out and see if we can kind of revisit some of the places we went before and expand on those, and really also invite you all to ask each other questions too. Like I'll get us started and then we'll kind of see where this goes. And I've got this kind of nice list of questions to pull from if we run out of things to say, which I kind of doubt we will. So so one of the neat places that we started when we met before was actually this conversation around clothing, and self-representation and kind of polish and professionalism and the ways that we may be dressed to kind of pass or move or present ourselves in certain spaces. And conversely, how we might undress to be more welcoming, and to make ourselves comfortable and to make other people more comfortable. So with that, take all of that as you'd like. But the question I pulled out of this was, how do we wear different hats, literally and metaphorically? And also, how do we think about, I guess, sort of like being more informal as a way of being more welcoming in our spaces? And I don't know how we're going to do this. We're going to raise our hands, I guess, is what we'll do, and I'll call you all out if that works. Shelley, do you want to start?
I mean, well, I want to hear about Shelley's story about being bare feet and all. Like, I want to go back to that.
Yes. Well, Stride was the hottest gallery in town, literally. And it was about 90 degrees, and I often got caught wearing no shoes, but there was always a pot of coffee on, and that really made a space of welcoming. And I had seen Geneviève talk in another occasion and mention her painting sweater, which made me really giggle that the front face of the gallery actually has this secret little painting sweater that goes on for those loving care and maintenance moments in the gallery. And I think sometimes curatorial or admin staff don't get seen as active participants in execution of the installation. And it's often all hands on deck for getting the work prepared. Mm-hmm.
I think something else that was really interesting is when we talked about exactly like as you said, Nicole, in terms of like what it means to be polished, and that usually this definition of being polished is, you know, very like it's exclusionary practice, and keeping, you know, certain folks from, you know, accessing different positions or spaces, and that it has been practiced, you know, throughout times, like when there was also like codes even like for clubs, let's say, so that like there would be like less Black people accessing like those spaces, or even thinking about hair and how it is still an issue for many Black folks in different like professional like areas. And then there's like I think there's like this difference between like also like artisan center and like galleries, let's say like the NGC, and then how you navigate those spaces. I remember, Nicole, when you were talking about like blazers and jeans, and how like you wanted to adopt that because you're like, well, I'm not gonna just wear like a 2-piece blazer skirt, like that's not. And then like the polishing what it means like in different, like for different like the genders also, like in the functioning in those binaries anyway. And so, yeah, I think like in terms of like the gallery space, I think or in the arts in general, we can definitely put, you know, like this, like the culture of excellence with like being polished, like they really are going together.
Yeah, like we we had some really good conversations about that, for sure. I think like one thing I didn't bring up when we chatted beforehand was also just Euro-Western understandings or standards of beauty. And so like I've been in a pandemic, and even like before the pandemic, when I went through like the Beading Symposium, NGC move, like finishing my master's, I put on weight, and like fat phobia is really rampant within the arts. Like not only are we supposed to dress a certain way, we're also supposed to look a certain way. Like after I gained weight, I saw that there's a lot less promotion that involved my photo. So like also internalizing these standards of beauty and how that also affects us professionally. And like, how does that shift our roles? Like, do you become somebody who's more in the background? You're not the person on the front page of the paper advertising the exhibition. Maybe you're brushed to the side on the photo and you're not in the center anymore. And so we can talk about like ageism, and we can talk about sexism and patriarchy and racism, and like clothing kind of just accumulates into this like bundle of it. We joked about the baggy black sack a lot. Love it. But I remember being told that curators wear black things when I was like trying to pick out clothes to wear to my first opening at the AGA, at the Art Gallery of Alberta. And I remember being like, no, I don't want to do that. And so my friend Jen Smith had given me this bright mustard yellow sweater dress. And that was the thing that I wore to the first opening. And everyone was like, I can spot you from across the room. And like, it became like a thing when it was just not the same thing that everybody's supposed to wear. So, oh yes, comfy fabrics all the time.
Can we talk about those earrings for a minute, Fran?
Yes, also beading in as a signal, but also like beadwork as a signal as an Indigenous curator, and wearing things from my community, from my friends. Alban Carias made these. I have these giant earrings from Catherine Blackburn. I have a beautiful medallion from Catherine Boyer, and wearing the work of members in my community into these spaces make me feel so much more like safe and held. But I also will like wear flowers intentionally into these spaces, because Anishinaabe are the flower people. or medicine people. And so like, I do try to wear flowers as much as I can on like official things. So yeah.
I also like have the question, like, who has the right to be messy? You know, there's also that. Like, who has the right to be messy? Like, definitely accumulates in all the things that you have mentioned, Franchesca. Like, there is a trope of like certain people can be messy, but then, and again, it also goes with like curating and the perceived like power. This is like for another conversation to like debunk what I mean by perceived power, but there's also that like in the roles that we inhabit, exactly, like there's way less in terms of like leeway of like what you're supposed to stand for and represent in like a sort of, you know, imagine it like a collective imagination that maybe you don't subscribe to. Yeah.
This is great. Yes, Fran loves to tease me about the baggy black sex, but it's like a way of dressing. I think in a yeah, again, I think for me it's lots to do about like gender representation too, and sort of not necessarily wanting to wear super feminine things to be comfortable. I've heard too that curators tend to wear all black. Half the story is that it's to blend into the background because you want to give space to the artwork and to the artist. But the other joke about that is we wear black because then it allows us to stand out in the white cube. So when you're in a white box, your little black outfit is the thing everyone sees. Yeah, I see a question too. We could totally pause and take a little question from the audience now, if that feels okay with everyone. Yeah, Priya, do you want to go ahead?
Hi, everyone. It's so great that this conversation is happening. And I'm a former student at Concordia, and I just really wanted to take a moment to honor all the racialized women, Black women, trans women, especially, all racialized women who have really held a lot of spaces together to enable for a sense of care to happen, both within our communities and beyond. And so, you know, when I saw this topic come up, it triggered a bit of a reflection on my time at Concordia. And when I was quite involved with Art Matters, this was back in 2016, as well as FASA. And it was tough. It was really tough, you know, being in a tokenized position and really wanting to advocate for the extra care that is needed to welcome in artists of color. And, you know, I can go into specific examples. I don't want to place blame on any particular person here. I know there's one person who is part of this meeting who has now left, was someone who I, you know, exerted a lot of labor in trying to validate the situation, that there's changes that still need to happen to make sure racialized people feel seen and welcomed in these environments. I'm currently, you know, I have my own practice as well that really meets the intersection of making healing more accessible and art in its process as something that has such a valuable outlet. One of my collaborators, Faria Roshan, is actually coming out with a book called Who is Wellness For? An examination of wellness culture and who it leaves behind. I really suggest pre-ordering this book. I know I'm plugging her in right now, but honestly, in becoming more and more aligned with people who are sharing this prioritization of making sure racialized people feel welcome and seen and have access to the healing, especially since there is so much intergenerational trauma that doesn't get talked about. And especially in the fine arts, you know, we've only started recognizing the need for anti-oppression trainings, but this is really just on the surface right now. So thank you for letting me speak tonight. I just wanted to again honor all the racialized women, trans women who have been really at the forefront of this work. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Priya. I think it's so great to hear this kind of centering of, and again, like when we think about who is wellness for, who is hospitality for, who are art spaces for, I'm really glad that you've brought up this kind of expanded question of how people, and particularly racialized women and trans women, can access those spaces too. Would any of the panelists like to jump in and respond to that? It looks like Geneviève is doing a nod. Yeah.
Yeah. I want to. Okay, sorry. I just wanted to verify if I was on mute because I still forget sometimes, even if it's been 2 years. I definitely wanted to thank Priya for speaking about this labor that is definitely still a thing. It's still there's extra labor, I think, exerted by racialized folks, especially in terms of making sure that the space is safe for the people that they are bringing in and to care for them. And I think to this effect, I wanted to share something that has been put out. It's it's called A White Institutions Guide for Welcoming Artists of Color and Their Audiences. That is on galleryweb.com. And also our previous director, Ines Berta, has participated in making also a document, asking the right questions in terms of how do you bring people in. And I just want to put that in the chat because I think it's also part of the conversations and having best practices in terms of exactly hospitality, and how actually it's not a one size fit all, but it's really something that needs to be catered to whoever comes in. Yeah.
I think this kind of
oh, sorry, go ahead, Fen.
I think this carries on to a conversation that we had the last time we met about budgets. I know, the sexiest conversation topic. But and also when we think about activism, we think about making space, and we think about welcoming our own communities within these spaces. We're not you know what, I need a budget. Well, we do need a budget. We always know that we need budgets, but inviting people in to have conversations and to dream their biggest dreams before we're you only have $6,000 to do this thing. How do we create flexible processes that take more work on our end? Maybe the artist isn't available. Maybe we don't get the funding. Having to navigate sometimes disappointment of okay, we didn't get that grant. But being transparent with that rather than inviting someone in at the last minute. How many of us have been put on grants without knowing we were put on grants, but just thrown out as a name of a person that would expand their diversity? How do we introduce care into our planning? When we did strategy planning for 2 years, 3 years down the road, there were never any artists in that room. And generally it's discouraged for you to also when you're doing studio visits, don't tell them that it's for a thing. But helping people understand the ideas that you're thinking of rather than just leaving them being I don't know if it's good. I don't know if it was bad. I gave them a lot of cookies. These really not fun, or I think that's really why we're gathered to talk today, is how do we include hospitality, care, guest host practices in our day-to-day ways that we engage with arts administration and budgets. and being in conversation and being able to like say sorry when we disappoint somebody. Like that's kind of just where I think that's where I can, that's the limit of my powers.
Yeah, thanks. Oh, Shelley, do you want to hop in here too?
Yeah, I think that's so well put, Fran, because I mean, what we're, it may sound that it's being superficial to talk about clothing, but because trying to raise money requires approaching various people and trying to put a best face forward and trying to show I can handle a budget, I know what I'm doing. All of this labor is really, really difficult. And then also trying to deal with the artist when there is disappointment, the funding didn't come through, or where those sacrifices come when you have to adjust a budget. All of those things really fall into the lap of the curator or the curatorial team, trying to figure out how to maneuver through this and really being this middle person responsible for both sides. And it's very difficult when you don't have boards or directors that actually are stepping in and getting the funding and allowing curators to do the work, to work with artists the way they want to, and to work with the public.
Yeah. If we can, I want to dig into this like budgety nerd question even more if you guys want. There was a line of thinking, I think I even put in the description around, contracts, emails, administrative documents, these things that can be essential tools that kind of set us up to have successful relationships with artists or with community, are ways of kind of describing what everyone's responsibilities are. But those things can also be kind of, I've been thinking about them as like tools of administrative violence, like when you're underpaying an artist to do a little project, and then you ask them to spend 4 hours filling out a contract, I'm exaggerating, but like what it means to kind of put that extra administrative labor on people from outside the organization, what it means to give contracts to people who might not have, the legal background or experience or knowledge for how to read those kinds of things. So the question coming out of that for me was, how can we make those tools, understanding that those tools are essential, but how can we hack them or rework them or customize them to suit our needs? And I had a funny thought a couple of weeks ago. We've been working with this artist, Frédéric La Liberté, on the latest install at the gallery, and she arrived and she just kind of said, like, I don't know where this is going to go, but it's going to be fun. And I thought that was such a nice statement of intention for how we were going to work together. And it wasn't in a contract, but it was a real kind of gesture towards, here's the spirit of how I want to relate to you guys during this install. And she also kept buying little bags of candy for everyone and sticking them around. Oh, hi, Frédéric. And I kept thinking too, I was like, maybe we should just put a line in our contract for everyone that asks what their favorite kind of candy is. Like there's little things we can do in a contract to sort of welcome people, or make space for them in other ways. And I think Geneviève I would love to hear from you a little bit, because you had described to us a care clause that you've started adding, not like to contracts that other people give you. So I also want to open up this potential for us to like push back on the contracts that we're forced to sign or asked to sign, that you're allowed to talk back and say, actually, this doesn't work for me. Geneviève, do you want to talk a little bit about that care clause and what's in it and when you've used it and what that looks like?
I'm so excited about contracts and also like budgets. Because I don't I was doing a workshop that was facilitated through Gandai. There was Noah Brownstein, and there was also no, I don't have the last name. I will put it in the chat. It's one from SAVAC. and it's talking about budget and basically like making the budget as something that mirrors our values, and then sometimes even starting like a proposal with the budget to make sure that the values are there first, and that like things like accessibility or different things that like would make sure that the artists are comfortable are not last, or the things that you're cutting through because you don't have enough money at the end. And also in this workshop, what was really interesting is that we were talking about money, but also like the emotional triggers that we all have around money. And I think it's really important that like when, yes, thank you, Marsha. Indu, that's just, yes, I was like, I have Indu, I don't have the last name, and I felt very bad, so thank you. And also Marsha is there, hi. Who is also part of Gendai with Pichinang. Anywho, all this to say, in terms of like money, I think like when we're talking about budget, it's also interesting to think that we don't approach budgets all the same way, but then thinking through what are your emotional triggers are very important to then being less afraid and then wanting to like approach budgets. Because I think like something that maybe I would say maybe bigger institutions in terms of keeping things separately is like we have a dissociation with the budget of the institution that is like hiring us, and it always feels like it's more complicated or bigger or something that we cannot tackle, when actually it should be something that we are invited to be in conversation with, and it's not really happening. And I feel like it's also like counting on the fact that like many people in the creative sector don't like to talk about money, which should not. And we've had this really interesting also conversation at the FOFA with the artist Joyce Juma also about like when you are starting in the arts, like when do you talk about money and how do you talk about money and like advocate for yourself. And I think the contract is the same thing. It's supposed to be something that should be in conversation, that should be evolving, that like basically the contract that you're giving is a proposition, and that this proposition can be then talked through and can, you know, one of the clauses of your contract usually is that amendments should be agreed upon both parties. And I feel like this should be read as an invitation to talk about the contract. And like when those two things, I feel like were finally understood in my mind, I think like both things were less scary. And as an independent curator, I do have the flexibility of toying around with contracts and what it means, and working with my collective Younger Than Beyonce too. And so I've been starting to exactly like explore what it means to then take care of people through a contract. And at first it started with like a joint care responsibility, kind of like implying both parties as taking care of each other. And that was my care clause, making sure that the other person understands what it means for me as like being taken care of and like what I expect from them. But now I've been trying to add also to my contract, like, actually, I don't want to assume what I think is care for you. I want you to tell me what do you expect from me, or what do you expect from us, like Younger Than Beyonce in the situation, if you work with us. And I think that has been kind of like pushing forward for me in terms of like being able to approach contracts differently, as not this like legal jargon that we don't understand and we're not sure what we're signing into, and maybe, you know, but like as something that is like approachable. Yeah.
It seems to me that CARFAC needs some work. And it's always at least 10 years behind what's going on. And where the contract was always this way of protecting yourself as an artist, but it kind of sets up a combative relationship in some ways. Or you don't want to be, as the artist, you don't want to be perceived as a troublemaker when you have the opportunity for an exhibition and a curator is working on your behalf, but you have this contract as a middle zone. And so maybe leaning into whatever kind of institution you understand, like Carfax to get a sense of money. More than you say, like you say, than conversation. Also uncomfortable talking about money. Franchesca, I was very interested too in your refusal to sign contracts and really like actually moving ahead with this. A contract is a bargaining tool. And I think there's such a fear in the power dynamic that it can be really intimidating. So thanks for bringing that up and negotiating through that.
I think specifically to contextualize, contracts are important for protecting yourself. I'm in like very much a place of privilege where I've worked with like large institutions. I financially am in a position where I can get by. Maybe I'm not like, but I always have eggs in multiple baskets, and I'm afforded the opportunities to like have a steady stream of projects or writing or speaking to be able to do that. So in the event that I'm in conflict with any of the individuals who have I'm working with, in the event that breaking the contract or not having one and just letting the project go, I'm not at risk. I don't have any dependents. I'm not ill and reliant on medication. So in some ways, like I hold power in that sense, in that if something falls through, if I can't come to an agreement with the institution about whatever we're disagreeing on at that point, either like about my writing or about my participation, the ways in which I will participate, the duration I'll participate in an exhibition. I have a very, very firm stance in that I will participate in these spaces and in these ways in a way that I feel is in a good way ethically to my community. And if at any point I feel like I'm compromising on those ethics and I won't be able to answer, like if someone messages me, not even any of the artists that I'm working with, but just somebody messages me and is like, hey, if I can't answer to them, then I can't participate in it. Like it's just not. And if there comes like a time where I can't, it's just not professionally feasible, I will walk away from the institution. I will walk away from art. Like there's just no, it becomes like this power dynamic. And this is a conversation Nicole and I have had throughout our previous professional experience, where you are told that you are lucky to have a job. You are lucky to have an exhibition. You are lucky to write for us. And in the reality, like the labor that we do, they are lucky. Our voices are important. And so just holding that and knowing your self-worth, no matter what institutions or no matter what like toxic individuals working in the arts will say, holding your self-worth and surrounding yourself with people who like affirm your worth is like one of the best survival strategies I figured out so far. I might be young, but it's been a hard like 8 years. And a lot of folks are probably like, buckle up. You want to be here for like 30. But yeah, I think that's really, really important. And so when Nicole was like alluding to demanding more, I think it just really comes from like a strong sense of self and a really strong sense of like obligation. And if I'm not here doing not the right thing, but doing my best, then I shouldn't be here. There's other people who can do a better job. So yeah, contracts are important, but also don't be afraid to walk away from them.
Boom. Yeah. We talked a bit about, I think, yeah, refusal also as a gesture, as a strategy, as a practice, which, you know, there's tons of great writing about that too. Maya has just reminded me about time. Like I said, I knew we would probably have, you know, more to talk about than time to do it in. But maybe before we open up for a quick bit of questions, I wondered about, we did have this nice little chat too about like really what I was thinking of as like icebreakers and invitations to connect on a personal level. And we talked about, you know, I've been thinking at the gallery lately, we've just been doing this really simple thing, which is propping the door open when we have opening hours. Because the first thing everyone does is they come outside the glass door and they kind of look and they're like, are you guys even open? So I'm thinking of a little bit, and you've all mentioned it at various moments, kind of like these very simple little things that you've done as kind of like icebreakers or invitations. And I'm wondering if you might want to each talk for a quick second about that. And if I have an idea what your things are, but if you forget, I can totally remind you what I'm thinking of when I think of you doing those things. So yeah, like a quick round of like favorite simple tool to welcome people to a space or make people feel included. Go.
Honestly, looking up from the desk and saying hello really is a really, really easy thing that doesn't always happen in galleries. And I don't need a tour, but I do need to be acknowledged as a visitor.
I actually like the idea of candies. I was like, can we have candies at the gallery? That would be nice. Like, you know, like when you're going like in an Uber and they have like all these things, like water bottles, like gum, like maybe we can like have that. But yeah, I think it's that. Like I wanted to say the same thing as Shelley. Is just kind of like acknowledge a starburst. Yes, I'm with you on this, Franchesca. But it's true, like just acknowledge the person like presence, but also I also like to think about the front desk as being also like quote unquote an information desk. So I like to, you know, help people if they have like different questions, like even that are not in the realm of the exhibition, like resources for navigating the art, like art sector, like a professional art sector, like when they're asking like where can I look for a job, where can I, like I like in terms of like having resources ready, I think is like also a good way of like making a space welcoming and encouraging kind of like connection, and making sure that the person knows that, you know, they can always come back also, like with questions, and that our door is open for that. Mm-hmm.
On the similar snacks and chats is my curatorial praxis. I also think that like when I start working with an artist on a new project, I really just like outline like what the project is about, like where things are with the institution, how I know the institution. I also reintroduce myself. I usually don't work with artists that I don't know, but I think it's really helpful to reintroduce myself and be like, hey, like this is where I am at now in my life. Also, sometimes people don't always remember me, and like not making that weird, because I'm also very terrible for forgetting people's names. So, you know, I think being really intentional about letting go of the curatorial like expertise, doing things to deconstruct that. So I think that makes and just constantly affirming that I am there for the artist, not the institution, and that I'm on their side and I'm ready to do what they need. So yeah, that's kind of, I think, like great icebreakers, invitations, build trust, and just shows that I can't be here without artists. I wouldn't want to do what I wanted to do without artists.
True. I also like in terms of like adding on to your point, Franchesca, like because you've been I think you said at least like twice during the talk that like, you know, you're young, and in terms of like deconstructing like curatorial knowledge and, you know, letting go of like this weird like aura that was like constructed like during like, you know, from cabinet of curiosity to like modernist time, and that we're really trying to like get rid of that because these are models that like are not working for a lot of people. I think in deconstructing that is to also kind of like welcome the fact that like knowledge comes at any age as well, you know, and that it's not, and that there's no like seniority, like yeah, that it doesn't matter. And so yeah, because like I guess it's something that you've encountered a lot. People be like, "You're so young," but at the same time, like it's such a powerhouse. Like it doesn't matter that you're like 25 or 35 or 40. Like I get like super energized when I talk with you, and that's like has, you know, value, and it's not, yeah. So anyway, thank you for like sharing your wisdom again.
It's in, especially here where we don't have a developed art market. We're working in public spaces. I think, you know, trying to make the spaces welcome to everybody is really, really crucial. That's what our system is set up for, however it gets modified and changed and however it needs to open up and be altered. It is subsidized under the idea that it's for everyone. You don't have to buy or know, or it should be a welcoming space.
Yeah, that there's no like exemplary like viewer or like audience. Also, like quick note, we did talk a little bit before this talk about like the role of gallery attendance and how it's a lot of the time like undervalued, in that there's actually a lot of vulnerability in some like shape or form like in that job, and that sometimes exactly like you are kind of like at the forefront of talking with like a myriad of people, but it doesn't mean that like those people like treat you right or have conversations that don't make you, you know, uncomfortable. And it's also like to acknowledge that, like, how do we care for the labor, also in terms of like thinking about how, although we're fighting it and we're trying to do better in the structures that we have and become more horizontal, the reality is that like anyway at FOFA, like, you know, like the pay and like the structures and everything, like it's not horizontal. And so it's really like take care of one another and like in being like in the same, I don't know, like same purview. And that, yeah, I think that gallery attending is not always appreciated, especially also in big institutions. It's just kind of like, oh yeah, like gallery attending, you're just doing this, but it actually requires a lot of emotional effort and like presence and like, you know, that like curators, it's say don't have to always do, or like deal with a lot of like influx of people. I remember like in my experiences sometimes, yeah, we're not treated well, you know, we're just kind of like, we're even sometimes just furniture. So yeah.
I think something that I became really mindful of after curating at the Art Gallery of Alberta was that the docents, when I curated, like really not like, I don't think anything I do is really inflammatory, but like talking about land, talking about territories, talking about settler colonialism, like it was when I'm putting together exhibitions, the conflicts that arise in those spaces happen to docents, and docents are generally like women, femme presenting individuals who might be going through university or might be doing it as like a supplement, like profession. I think at the National Gallery we have like full-time, like in provincial galleries, like it's a different like type of scenario, but these are vulnerable folks, like where people do feel the like they have the ability or the power to yell at someone for something that I wrote. Like, call me, please, and let them yell at me over the phone. Don't take that shit. And like, it's something that I've thought about a lot since then. When I'm curating, is like, how do I prepare individuals for these conversations? How do I prepare the gallery to ensure they are safe? Because galleries, like, historically, like, haven't exhibited exhibitions like that. And then it just becomes like, it is super unappreciated. Oh, sorry, that doesn't. But like, so for this reason, like, at least like at this point, I'm more intentional about building those relationships and building trust with staff in institutions. And so like, I worked in artist runs, and I've done like, contract curating, but like, I desire to go back to an institution so I can build those relationships over a long term. Not that there's like a right way to do it or a wrong way to do it. Like, we're just taking, in our previous meeting, Geneviève and I had like a conversation about like artist run curating and institutional curating. And it was really cool. And it made me miss it a little bit. Like, I was like, oh, but yeah, it has to do with like, I'm not just caring for artists. I'm not just caring for folks who are coming into institutional spaces, folks from my community coming into institutional spaces. I'm also caring for the staff who are trying to like match where I'm at, but might not be there, right? And so labor, education, all of that stuff. And obviously like coming up to like volatile resistance at times, but it's not always like that. And not to dismiss volatile resistance, pretty detrimental. But I think that really, really long-term chipping at it is the route that I really want to go. And also exhibitions with no more than 4 artists from now on. But we have a really good question in the chat.
Yeah, that's a exciting question.
We might go over a few minutes.
Is that a lot? Can we go a little over? That's okay.
Absolutely. Well, I'm in charge of closing things, so we can go all night. But there's, yeah, Hans, thank you for this question. Do you want to ask your question with voice, or we can read it out for you?
Sure, I'll read it out. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for this really beautiful conversation. So my question is, just thinking about how all of this work, hospitality work, can be underappreciated and requires particular energies and patience and emotional labor. So I wanted to know if there are any ways that you practice self-care, because this work can also be quite isolating and oftentimes done in silos for a large period of time. So yeah, I was just curious.
Calling a friend. No, but seriously, like I love like doing all of these other things. Like, I am dependent on my bathtub for well-being. Like, I love taking baths. I'm a bath person, especially in the winter. Like, it's just something I need. But it's so like outside of like, like the physical realm, and making sure that, yeah, like on, let's say like during installs, let's say time that are like super stressful, I realize that like it's a time that like I will wake up super early, and then I will take a bath before going installing, because I don't sleep well, but I know it will help my body. But and then like trying to drink more water and stuff like that. But really, it's like calling a friend, like whenever you're in doubt, or something that I talk a lot with people is that, and we had the conversation also with Franchesca, like I like when I was saying, like, I don't tend to work with people I don't know, but there are moments that you're really interested in someone's practice. And so you work with somebody that you don't know, and throughout that time, you're getting to know each other through work. But even with people like sometimes you have friends, you never work with them. You don't know who their work self is. And so it's really to make sure that like you try to see like if you like what is your capacities, what are your boundaries with the people that you're working with, although it's like difficult. But also like I think we're ill-equipped, to be quite honest. Like a lot of us in the arts, I think we're ill-equipped to deal with maybe like tensions or conflict, and these are moments that can really wear us down. I think that's when we really feel alone, especially like in our careers. And again, like when in doubt, when not sure, calling, having like curatorial pals, like, ask, like, see if there's those people that like you can text and be like, hey, if there's anything, are you someone that I can just hit up or can just text? Some things I also do is like also ask the person before, it's like, do you have the capacity to hear me vent? Sometimes it just gives you more perspective, especially if you are in an emotional, like in a state that you're having maybe something difficult with somebody. I think it's always preferable to like wait and vent and get perspective before getting like head on because you want to fix it. Because sometimes like fixing it makes things really harder. Yeah, because there's a lot of quirks in, I think, relationship. Yeah. And so and sometimes self-care is just not to talk to people for a few hours. It helps.
I think it's hard too sometimes because work life and life blur together. It's so gray that, it's wonderful to be around like-minded souls, but it's sometimes hard to remove yourself from that when you need a break. So I think, it is very difficult. I thought a lot about the care for the curator and care for administrators. It's a very, because we keep on asking, now you got to go get the candies, and now you got to go, there's more and more jobs with care, and who cares for the caretaker?
Yeah. Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Ken. Go.
Sorry, Nicole. We used to always do this during meetings too. Yeah. Like, why do we have to take care of ourselves? Who's taking, like, Geneviève asked amazing. Yeah, Geneviève asked this really great question, which was like, who's taking care of us? Like, where's our care? And like my response during that meeting was like, personally, in like those really like difficult times when there's like conflict or like royally screwed up during an exhibition, I was given not the benefit of the doubt, but I was given an opportunity to have conversations with artists who sent me messages being like, so what happened? Like, and they trusted that this wasn't like, that it was like an oversight or there were other things at play. Like I had an opportunity to explain, and that was really important. Like that meant a lot to me. And in that, again, like I felt really held and cared for by my community. And that was like the moment where like that care was like reciprocated. And so I think that was really important. And as like, I'm not as great about taking care of myself physically. Like I had to change my screen because there's a shelf behind me with a bunch of energy drinks on it. Not great, but I for 2 months I wasn't drinking them, and now I'm back. But I also just think that self-care is setting boundaries. And for me, self-care is not saying yes to projects I'm not excited about. If there's something that comes up and they're like, we'll tell you what's going up in the show, I'm like, I'm okay. Like, and self-care is not doing like educational labor that I'm not being compensated for. Like when I'm asked to provide a list of Indigenous artists for something, like a lot of it is refusal. And that comes off like a little like brusque or like unwelcoming. And when I talk about like a care praxis, people are like, well, that's not very caring, you know. But like caring isn't about saying yes all the time. Like that's not, caring is also being like, maybe you should do this education yourself. And if you don't know the names of Indigenous artists, like how are you going to facilitate an exhibition with Indigenous artists in it? So I think that's another way that I take care of myself. Just know. And I think that there was a third point. It is drifting away, but yeah, I just think those are the things that keep me together. And yeah, always like a willingness to walk away. This is such a dire message. I'm sorry.
No, I think it's the best message. I'm like, keep on repeating it louder to back. Like, I think we're like, yeah, we're not socialized to say no in that way. And therefore, like, it takes a lot of unlearning, and it's good to hear it more and more. And I think it's also like it plays with the scarcity mindset that I think some of us are more affected by than others. And it's to like trust that if you're saying no now, it doesn't mean that it's the end of your career or end of any opportunities. And that we don't have to like hoard opportunities. Also, I think like it's important to try to like think about that too. And I do think I also have to like think about that, to be like quite honest, because sometimes those tendencies like they tend to creep up again, even though you think you got away from them, and they creep up in different ways. And so it's to be attentive to that. So like keep on saying it. It's not dire, it's empowering. And yeah, empowering, yes.
So we
I'm so glad. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Maya.
Well, I was just going to suggest maybe we do one more question and then close things down at 6:10, keeping in mind the theme of hospitality that you've been, you know, working for an hour and a half, and it's time for me to send you dinner.
Totally. I was going to add just maybe one more little piece on that self-care one, which was, yeah, Bill for Care. Which was, I had this thought too after our chat about, there's this term managing up, which is sort of like how you relate to your boss to get them to do what you want, or like less about that, but this way that they sort of from management theory or of kind of HR ways of thinking. And I had managing up, but I had this question that I'd put in some of our notes that was like, what would it look like to talk about carrying up? And how we kind of undo some of those hierarchical relationships by doing care both for artists, but also sort of in all directions. And I think Fran had talked a little bit about these like kitty cat post-it notes she was using with a certain senior curator at the NGC. And I wanted to shout out too, like Geneviève has been occasionally just tells me to go home or take a day off, which is a way of practicing care that I think, you know, like the way that we can give each other permission to do those things is super powerful too. And, you know, like telling your boss to go away, I think is so nice. I love it. It's the best. Yeah, but we do have, Maya, do you want to read the other question? We had one question come in, which I think we've kind of circled around a little bit already, but maybe if folks have other thoughts on that one.
Yeah, it definitely resonated with some of the things that Fran was just saying about boundaries and expectations of behavior. And it was a question that came in related to rude or disrespectful guests or artists and curators. It happens when we work in cultural industries with people. Are you a good host if you turn them away? And I suppose if you turn them away is in an expanded sense, we're saying like, no, actually this project won't work, or this conversation can't keep going this way. Like, what are some of your conflict management tips, I suppose, that also from your perspective bring care into that conflict?
I think conflict is good. I think it's really important. I think conflict is a really good catalyst for learning. Not like under duress, but under like articulating like what is acceptable and unacceptable behavior. And like, this isn't to encourage, like, I'm not a person who just like flips a table in the middle of a meeting. But like, I am happy to address, like, if someone is behaving in a way that's not respectful, like not respectful to me, not respectful to my peers, not respectful to the artists that I'm like present for, because a lot of the time I'm present in spaces that artists aren't invited to. And it's like my responsibility to speak for them, which is very uncomfortable. But refusing to have a team member on a project because they are not demonstrating the capacity to work with the artists that I am hosting is care. If they do not have the capacity, if they do not have the cultural competence to work with them, then I'm creating an unsafe environment for folks. And I'm potentially letting it affect the quality of the exhibition. Like, if you want to talk about standard practice, you want to talk about excellence in the arts and whatever, go Canada Council. They like having a space with cultural competency is the best thing that you can do for your institution, for your department. These aren't diversity hires. You are hiring experts in the field, in a field that you have no access to and no amount of reading is going to give you. So I think that is really, really important. And uninviting people from projects, uninviting people and switching in another person from the same department, like, it's 100% acceptable. It is not unwelcoming. You, like, as the representative in that institution, it is your responsibility to do that. And honestly, if you are a non-Indigenous, if you're a settler person, and you're seeing this stuff happen and you're silent, you're complicit. So uninvite people all around.
I think I also want to add, like, you don't have to be alone in doing that. I think it can be very hard to tackle that alone sometimes. And again, like, going back to like, what are the tools that we have for mediation or, you know, conflict resolution? It's not a training really that you have in the arts. You're just kind of like navigating spaces and you go as you can with the tools that you have, and then you learn depending on like the relationship. So I think like maybe something that should be more present is also to be able to have like mediators and third parties, and like in this process sometimes like could also help and alleviate maybe some of that weight. Maybe like, yeah, because not everybody like have the same ways of dealing with different types of like, you know, relationships. And so I think, yeah, you don't have to do that alone. I think that's like something I wanted to add, because it can be a hard thing to do. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for bringing in that last question. Looking at the time, I want to maybe suggest that we wrap down this iteration of the conversation. I know we'll keep going between the four of you, and I like to always do this imagination of these morsels of wisdom as webbing through people who've come through our talk, but also will, you know, catch it, the recording. There's been people who've been watching the streaming on YouTube. So your wisdom is going through the web, literally and metaphorically. And it's now my pleasure to invite everyone else who's still here hanging on after 6 o'clock to make Zoom signals to thank Shelley and Nicole and Geneviève and Franchesca for talking about this nuanced way of working in the cultural industries in a good way, and doing so mindfully, and what that looks like for each and every one of you from your positionality. Thank you so much. And this officially winds down Conversations in Contemporary Art for the season. I just want to give a very quick thank you also to the people who help behind the scenes, thinking about, you know, speaking about labor. That's Joni, who I think is still with us, Joni Chung, aka the Snack Witch, who helps with the promo for those of you who enjoy the great copy that comes through on our Instagram and Facebook. That's Joni. Also Karen Zippiger, for those of you who move through the MFA Studio Arts program. You know that Karen gets stuff done, and you don't always know that it's done before you think it has to be done. So thank you so much, Karen, and Edisandri, who also helps with publicity. It's been a pleasure working with everyone this year and doing the last event with the 4 of you. Thanks for finding the time and energy to do it. Thanks, everyone. I'm going to unpin.
I don't know how to move to the other space.
Yes, do you still have the Zoom link?
Can you send it to me again?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Okay, I'll see y'all over there. I might have to have a little body break first.
Yeah. Body break, body break. Okay, sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
Again, Shelley.
Super.
Bye.
Bye. See you at the next one.